So welcome back. And now we're at the stage of you've undertaken your analysis and you've synthesised much of that analysis, and you're now pushing towards a recommendation. And what we would really like to share with you now is about how the way you should think about building your argument and building your communication around your recommendation. So we wanted to introduce you to some structured thinking focused around the Minto model, which was an ex-McKinsey partner who developed up the Minto model, which many of you may have heard of. But it's really a fundamental way of taking all that data and information and putting it in a form that will enable you to have an effective communication and logic to building your arguments around your recommendation. So you'll see on the next slide it's headed up Structured Thinking Minto, and you'll see that we've started with the exec summary on that particular page. And really what's so important is to present to a group of executives or an audience is present the recommendations. It's the fundamental way of actually communicating your solution is put the recommendations first and then put the sub-recommendations and then put the facts and the supporting material that you want beneath that information. So really start with your recommendations, then have some supporting information around that, and then even some of the data and facts way below that. It's a way of structuring your argument around your recommendation. So we don't start with all the data and all the process we went through, we start with the recommendation. Very, very important. So if I take you to the next slide, a bit of background on Barbara Minto around the pyramid principle of structuring your thinking, and it's all about influencing and engaging an audience. And this is what you need to be doing. As I said in the beginning of the program around the consulting process, you can have the greatest recommendations, which might be perfect for the organisation to solve the problem they have, but if you don't communicate it and persuade others to your way of thinking, you may have failed in your consulting project. So once again, another critical element is about building your argument around your recommendations. And you'll see here on the slide that really it's based, this way of thinking is based on people listen to things that they want to know. And they want to know your recommendations. I don't think they're necessarily so interested in your process first up. And if you get their interest, people want to know more, is our experience. If you get their interest, they want to know more. And if you tell them something that they don't know, they'll start asking you questions, and then you can go to your detailed supporting material to actually give the evidence and to build your credibility that you've really thought this through and you've got a logic and a basis around the recommendation you're providing. So very important way of thinking here around building your arguments and the way you structure your thinking to build your recommendation. And once again, this doesn't necessarily need to be done in isolation of one person. You can certainly do this sort of thing in brainstorming sessions within a team. In fact, we'd recommend it. And then you'll see on the next slide, we've got a logic in thinking and writing. So I want to move you from a way of thinking and about structuring your argument to the Barbara Minto model of actually communicating this, which is think about the situation, the complication, the question that raises, which you would have already got that question as we talked about right at the beginning. What's the problem? What question are you trying to answer? So situation, complication, question, and then what's the answer to that situation, complication, and question. Very important way of thinking about now how you start communicating this back to your client. So once again, let's just now move on to a little bit more detail about what we mean by situation, complication, question and recommendation. Before I go to an example of how you might structure it, let me just revisit what I said 3 minutes ago. Really important for you. A lot of consultants, because you're doing all this detailed research, lots of data, lots of interviews, pulling all that information together into facts, you analyse it, you reach some conclusions, then you come up with a recommendation. That's the way you may typically think through it. What we're actually saying to you is, if you're going to communicate this and build your argument, start with the recommendation. So you've got your recommendation. What are the actions the client needs to take to implement those actions, to fix the problem, solve the issue? What are the conclusions you're drawing out of that? And then the facts in the analysis come later. In fact, the facts and analysis would be in an appendices in most situations. So we're really encouraging you to not to present the process you went through, what all the facts you found, really start with the recommendations and then have your supporting evidence and arguments to support that recommendation. And that way you'll get interest and you'll get questions, and really your communication should become more of a conversation versus a presentation. It's worked for us for many decades, and it's a great model to think about. So what should be done, why should it be done, and how do we know that? We've put at the bottom of that particular slide. That's the way you should think about writing your report, building your PowerPoint presentation if it's in that form. So, as I said, we've moved from a way of thinking to now writing the report or presenting the outcome. So if you pick the Barbara Minto model, what we're saying here, start with a situation, explain it, start with the complications. So it's a complication in the story, what's creating the imperative for change, which is the complication. What question ultimately then are we answering? And that builds the governing idea, which is primarily the recommendation. And this would all link back to your original hypothesis. Remember we talked about many chapters ago where we talked about actually build your hypothesis and prove or disprove. And the hypothesis was around a solution. So your recommendation is obviously your solution. So if your hypothesis has stood the test of analysis, it's now proved correct, it's now sitting in your recommendation. And there could be the what. There could be some sub-rationales and support for that particular recommendation or sub-elements to it. So, what is it that needs to be done? Why does it need to be done? And then below that is the why. Why do we know that? Why do we need to make these changes? What have we found out that drives us to suggesting these changes? And where are all the facts that support the why, what, and the governing thought? Okay, so really your exec summary, your report, and any PowerPoint type oral presentation should be structured this way in the presentation. And our experience has been this is the way to get attention, this is the way to start making it memorable, this is the way to get the executives engaged. And they will ask you, if you've got their interest, they will definitely start asking you the what, why and the facts question, which will turn into a great conversation. On the next page, we've got a particular example which this particular organisation, as you'll see, it's just a simple example, is really provides exploration equipment for mining companies. So you might be in a situation where iron ore prices have declined considerably. This exploration company that provides particular hardware and services around exploring for new iron ore, for example, its business has been declining. So the issues you've found is it's got low cost is critical to the market because iron ore prices have fallen for their clients. This particular organisation has a cost disadvantage in the way its products are built, and therefore there needs to be an initiative to reduce cost is the overall recommendations. And then you'll see some of the other logic behind that around price is a key determinant for customers, so they've done their customer survey information and price is everything. So a mining company that's into iron ore with lower prices per tonne clearly wants to keep exploring for new product or new iron ore reserves, but they are going to be very price sensitive, for example. So I won't go through all of those points on that particular example, but you can see in that example we're giving you just the way that the logic is built up to the argument that ultimately this particular organisation needs to reduce costs of its products if it wants to remain competitive in the marketplace. Okay, so your strategic consulting project, we would expect that you would be using this type of thinking, this mindset first of all around Barbara Minto, around structuring your arguments and your thinking, and then presenting it in this very structured view of starting with a recommendation and building it out with supporting arguments below and the facts. So we'll leave that with you to actually apply to your particular project. And we've seen this work, as I said, over the decades, and it's something we really want you to practice.